Coming up on today's show, I want to run through some surprise cut candidates for the Browns now that the NFL draft is over and their roster is nearly complete, maybe an extra signing or two throughout the summer. I think we have a pretty good idea as to who may be on the bubble. Now, we did this exact same video almost a year ago, and you can see that of the 5 guys I had as surprise cut candidates last year, 2 ended up getting cut, Perrion Winfrey and Anthony Schwartz, and then Josh Dobbs ended up getting traded. So that's the whole point of surprise. I don't think any of these candidates are like shoo-ins to be cuts, but I definitely think there is some sort of merit to the possibility of them being released. Now let's get started with the quarterback room, beginning with Dorian Thompson-Robinson. The Browns have made a lot of additions to this room through free agency. They signed Jameis Winston and Tyler Huntley, and DTR may find himself on the outside looking in. Last year, the former 5th-round pick, I thought he showed some real progress from his first start against the Ravens to his last against the Broncos. But ultimately, with a new offensive coordinator in town in Ken Dorsey, he may not feel like DTR is a good fit for what he wants to do schematically offensively. And if Tyler Huntley kind of shows out and shows up and outshines DTR in training camp, he may win that 3rd quarterback spot. I would look at this as a possible training camp trade, just like how last year Barry traded Josh Dobbs to the Cardinals for a 5th. If a team loses their starting quarterback or their backup quarterback and DTR is putting up some good stuff during the preseason games, maybe a 5th-round pick offer will be tempting enough for Andrew Barry to take them up on it. Ultimately, I believe the Browns are going to have 3 quarterbacks on their 53-man roster. After all the injuries they sustained last year at that position, my suspicion is they're going to want to be extra ready and prepared and deep in that room. So it'll come down to Huntley and DTR for that final spot. And with that being said, if you had to pick one to keep, who would you rather have? Tyler Huntley or Dorian Thompson-Robinson? I kind of struggle with seeing Andrew Barry move on from a 5th-round pick just one season later when it's not like DTR was some disaster last year. He looked like a 5th-round pick who was a rookie that got tossed into the fire. There were some good things. There were some things to work on, but you should never have had unrealistic high expectations for the guy. So I want to believe that he'll find a way to stay on the roster, but actions speak louder than words, and Andrew Barry signing 2 quarterbacks definitely puts DTR on some thin ice. Next cut candidate is a former 3rd-round pick, wide receiver David Bell. After 2 seasons with the Browns, we just haven't seen a big enough jump from him to really believe he's a lock to make the roster. Especially when you look at the Browns' wide receiver room. Andrew Barry traded for Jerry Jeudy. He drafted Jamari Thrash. He has brought in some competition to this room, and David Bell may find himself on the outside looking in. Last year, I thought he showed some really good stuff towards the end of the season. Put together a 2-touchdown game against the Bengals in Week 18. But ultimately, the NFL is a results-driven business. And Bell, through 2 seasons, I don't think has performed or given enough results to put himself down in concrete as a lock to make the roster. So here's how I look at the wide receiver room. Amari Cooper, Jerry Jeudy, Elijah Moore, Cedric Tillman, they are all locks to make this roster, as is Jamari Thrash, even if he's not as high up on the depth chart as David Bell is. There's just no way, unless he has the world's worst training camp, the Browns are cutting their 5th-round pick a few months later. So I'm going to invent a new roster term, which is Bubble Plus. And I think David Bell finds himself in that spot where he's not a lock, but he's also not on the bubble. Like, him being on the fence could go either way. No, I think there's a better chance he makes the roster than he misses the roster, but I don't think he can show up to camp a little overweight and a little out of shape and not running pristine routes and figure, what does it matter? It's August. I'm a shoo-in to make the roster. No, I do believe Barry will hold on to his former 3rd-round pick, but Bell is definitely a cut candidate to keep an eye on and store in the back of your mind. I want to lump the next 2 together since they play the same position to avoid being redundant, and that is defensive tackles Siaki Ika and Maurice Hurst. No room has seen more additions than the defensive line this offseason for the Browns, specifically at the defensive tackle spot. Brought back Shelby Harris, brought back Maurice Hurst. and then Shelby Harris, and then brought back Maurice Hurst, then signed Quinton Jefferson, and then drafted Michael Hall. So let's compare Maurice Hurst to Siaki Ika for a moment. Hurst got much more playing time last year. I mean, Ika didn't play his first NFL game, I believe, until the Bears, if the memory serves correct, whereas Hurst was a really pivotal member of that defensive line rotation. Despite not being one of the two starters, he still contributed a whole lot. 22 tackles, 1.5 sacks, 4 tackles for loss, 5 QB hits. He put together some excellent plays up until a season-ending injury. Now, I'm also going to look at the total guaranteed money given to the 3 signed defensive tackles so far. Shelby Harris got $3.9 million. Quinton Jefferson got $3.6 million. Maurice Hurst got $1 million. So you can see a big noticeable drop-off from the first two to Maurice Hurst. And I'm only looking at the guaranteed money because that is what Andrew Berry has put Jimmy Haslam in for. And I don't think Berry is going to flush $3.9 million down the toilet a few months after signing Shelby Harris. So that's why these two guys would not be surprise cut candidates, because I don't think they're cut candidates at all. Whereas Maurice Hurst, just $1 million, teams have moved on from a player a lot more than just $1 million buckaroonies. So with that in mind, let's look at Andrew Berry's history at the defensive tackle position. Because as the GM for the Cleveland Browns the last 4 years, he's never taken more than 5 defensive tackles on his initial 53-man roster. Now, some new NFL rule changes this year allow teams to put guys on injured reserve before roster cutdown day, whereas in the past, they had to put them on their roster, and then the very next day, they could put them on IR to open up a roster spot. Teams no longer have to do that gymnastics. They can put a guy on IR and get him back still in the middle of the season. So that could allow a team like the Browns to get an extra defensive tackle on their 53-man roster. Now, here is what I'm projecting for the defensive tackle room. Dalvin Tomlinson, Shelby Harris, Quinton Jefferson, and Michael Hall are all locks to make this roster. And that could be the end of the story. That's 4 guys right there. They took 4 guys last year. I'm thinking they want to bring on at least a 5th guy, though. They gave Maurice Hurst $1 million in guaranteed money. To me, that shows a decent level of interest and more than just being a camp body, especially with the way he played last year. And then you've got Siaki Ika, who I haven't talked about a lot because there's not a whole lot to talk about. Like, he was drafted in round 3 out of Baylor a season ago, hardly played at all last year, didn't record a single stat, and it was more or less a redshirt freshman year for him. And I know Jim Schwartz wanted to turn him from a dump truck into a Ferrari, but maybe he's good as a dump truck. Like, maybe you should keep him at 300-plus pounds and let him be a nose tackle and a tree stump in the middle of the defensive line. But if the Browns want their DTs to be athletic guys that can get into the backfield and make plays against the quarterback, Siaki Ika is just not your guy. So we're going to find out what the Browns want out of their defensive tackles, but right now, they've got 6 legit contenders to make the 53-man roster, and Berry's never taken more than 5. Now, before we look at the final surprise cut candidates on today's show, really quickly, there's a great deal still going on at Fanatics where you can get this Cleveland Browns t-shirt on sale when you go to chatsports.com/CLE shirt. Now, Fanatics like to have their sales come and go from time to time, so check back later if the sale's gone. But if you want to up your Cleveland Browns wardrobe, use that link today to get this awesome Browns t-shirt. I put it in the comments and description of today's video. 5th and final surprise cut candidate, and this one would be a surprise. That is Devin Bush, the linebacker who they signed not too long ago, right? Early in the stages of free agency, inked him to a 1-year, $1.5 million contract. Now, they could have inked him to a 1-year, $100 million contract. All I care about is the guaranteed money. That shows really how committed the team is to putting the guy on their roster. And they only guaranteed $500,000. So if Devin Bush does not have a good training camp and does not have a good preseason, the Browns could move on from him and not be out $1.5 million, but to be out $500,000. That's really all they're in for here. Now, last year with the Seahawks, he had a career-low 250 snaps, played in 13 games, made 3 starts. He was a rotational linebacker at best. And as for the Browns linebacker room, I think he would likely be slated as a starter to begin training camp because of his experience, but I wouldn't put it past second-year man Diabate or Tony Fields or Nathaniel Bookie Watson, the rookie from Mississippi State, to really push Devin Bush for that starting job. Now, I also think the Browns are going to go with a lot of 3 safety looks and just 2 linebackers, JOK and Jordan Hicks. But Devin Bush does not come into training camp with solid ground. Like, he's got some experience. He's got the pedigree of being a former top 10 pick in the draft. And maybe Jim Schwartz feels like, Andrew, if you can get me this guy, $500,000 guaranteed, bet on me for $500,000 to get that former top 10 potential out of him. And that's not a bad bet for the Browns to make. But if Schwartz is unable to get the best out of Devin Bush and find that playmaker that we saw do so well at Michigan, then the Browns could move on from him pretty scot-free. Now, what could make things a little bit more complicated for Bush is Nathaniel Watson, a guy that I'm pretty high on the more I read and the more I watch because he was uber productive last year at Mississippi State. His 10 sacks tied with Dallas Turner for the SEC lead a season ago. So there's no question about production. He's a really well-rounded linebacker. There's just questions about whether or not he can avoid getting in his own way. And if he has a very productive training camp and looks like the clear-cut starting linebacker next to JOK and Jordan Hicks, don't put it past Andrew Berry to go, well, if Devin Bush isn't even a starter for us, what are we doing giving a guy all that much money to be our backup? Let's move on and let's roll with a younger linebacker core. So give me your surprise cut candidate. Just ran through 5. Last year we saw 2 of my 5 get cut, 1 get traded. So I'll take like 2.5 out of 5, which not a bad ratio for it being May right now. Give me your surprise cut candidate in the comment section below. All right, let's wrap up the video by picking a card. A little bit of a short, sweet video today, kind of get you guys on your way with the weekend here. Mr. Cullen Brown, which card do you want to go with, amigo?
I think today I'm going to go with the 7. I'm going to go 7 of hearts.
7 of hearts?
7 of hearts today.
All right, I like it. I'm going to go with the 6 of diamonds. 10 of spades. 10 of spades. All right. That will do it for us on today's show. Thank you guys so much for tuning in. Enjoy the rest of your day, and we'll catch up later.